Let's go to the brief news from the world over this week. Pope Francis is lending his and the Church's moral authority to the political fight over climate change. On Tuesday, the Pope welcomed United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to the Holy See. The Secretary General was there to deliver the keynote address at a Vatican-sponsored conference pushing for worldwide action on climate change. Ban opened with a doomsday declaration, later reflected in a joint statement. He asserted that climate change is happening and it's the fault of humans. Ban further praised Pope Francis's moral and political leadership on the issue, as well as his forthcoming papal encyclical on the environment.
I'm sure that this encyclical will have a profound impact in the discussions of climate change. And I'm also hopeful that his address to the Joint Congress in the United States and his address in the special session, summit session of the United Nations General Assembly will have a profound impact. I counted on his moral voice, moral leadership.
Pope Francis's first-of-its-kind encyclical on the environment is due for release this summer. The Pope will address the U.S. Congress and the UN General Assembly in September during his visit to the U.S. and Cuba. Absent from the Vatican conference were scientists, politicians, or church leaders who question the evidence for climate change, human-induced or otherwise. In a related story, concerned climate change skeptics were on hand in Rome to question the claims being presented at the Vatican conference. A spokesman for the Chicago-based conservative public policy group, the Heartland Institute, said that Pope Francis, although well-meaning, is making a mistake by partnering with the United Nations on this issue.
I am concerned that his timetable for writing an encyclical and who I see that the Pope is talking to, that he may not have a chance to really look at the broader field of engineering and science that says there's not a problem. I would pray that the Pope would have discernment in looking at this problem and that he would listen to all scientists, not just the United Nations.
The group claims that for the past 25 years, UN data on global warming has been inaccurate and is not credible on the science. They claim the UN's numbers are being used to, quote, stack the deck in favor of climate alarmism and outright corruption, end quote. Well, marriage had its day in court on Tuesday. The U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in 4 cases to consider whether traditional marriage laws are constitutional and whether states must recognize same-sex marriages performed in other states. The High Court's decision could erase the long-standing legal definition of marriage as a union between one man and one woman. Same-sex couples can marry in 36 states and the District of Columbia. The Supreme Court's ruling is expected in June. We will analyze the oral arguments and how a constitutional right to gay marriage could affect religious freedom and more, coming up in the show. Rescue and recovery efforts are continuing in Nepal, following a 7.9 magnitude earthquake that hit the mountainous country this past Saturday. The devastation is widespread. The death toll has passed beyond 5,000, according to officials. A staggering 1.4 million are in need of food across the densely populated Kathmandu Valley. On the ground, Nepalese Bishop Paul Simic described the scene as frightening. He stressed the difficulties in the wake of the disaster, with communications crippled, roads impassable, and entire communities still cut off from aid. And Syrians remain under siege after 4 years of civil war. Human rights groups are reporting that ISIS has killed more than 2,000 people in Syria since the declaration of a caliphate last June. These killings are separate from those on the battlefield. According to its count, the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says Islamic militants have shot, stoned, and beheaded at least 2,154 people during that time period. Another 500 believed kidnapped by ISIS remain missing and are feared dead. The watchdog group is calling for the United Nations Security Council to act and to stop the ongoing murder of the Syrian people. More on Syria, ISIS, and the desperate plight of its Christians firsthand with the Bishop of Aleppo later in the program. Meanwhile, ISIS sympathizers in Italy are now threatening violence there. Photographs allegedly taken in Italian cities, including Rome, accompanied with threatening messages, are being posted on the internet. The pictures, whose authenticity cannot be confirmed, show police vehicles and landmarks with a bit of paper in the frame. The paper has the Islamic State logo on it, the hashtagged phrase Islamic State in Rome, and a message in Italian that reads, "We are in your streets." And a curfew in Baltimore continues as thousands of police and National Guardsmen try to restore calm in the wake of urban rioting. The civil unrest began Saturday after a criminal suspect, Freddie Gray, died while in police custody. A week earlier, he had suffered injuries to his spine and larynx. In the meantime, 6 police officers have been suspended, while the cause and circumstances of Gray's injuries and his death are under investigation. Baltimore Archbishop William Lori said the violence and heightened emotions threaten to overshadow what should not be forgotten, a family's devastating loss and what he calls a grieving community's peaceful quest for answers and for justice. And new concerns for the U.S. economy this week as the country's gross domestic product came to a virtual standstill for the first quarter of 2015. A surprise to analysts, the GDP came in at just 0.2%. That's about a point lower than what economists predicted. The Federal Reserve shrugged off the news and left its key interest rate at near zero. They appear to be hedging against a possible rate hike later this year. And it appears the war on women mantra will be carried into the 2016 presidential race. This past week at the Women of the World Summit, Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton lamented that women are still being denied critical access to reproductive health care and safe childbirth. She put the blame squarely on culture and religion.
All the laws we've passed don't count for much if they're not enforced. Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will. And deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed.
That statement unsettled some in the religious community as Clinton seemed to support government enforcement of abortion with no regard for religious belief or exemptions. And Pope Francis weighed in on women's issues this week. During his Wednesday audience, the Pope said women should be compensated equally for equal work, and that the pay disparity between men and women is, quote, pure scandal. He said equal pay would be a witness of God's blessing of marriage and the equality enjoyed by the spouses. Veering from his prepared remarks, he also warned men not to be sexist and not to make the same mistake Adam did, who blamed Eve for making him consume the forbidden fruit. And longtime spokesman for the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Sister Marianne Walsh, passed away on Tuesday after a battle with breast cancer. She was 67. Sister Marianne, as she was called, was well known within Catholic media, having served the conference's communications department for 20 years until her retirement last summer. She was the first woman to serve as Director of Media Relations for the bishops. May she rest in peace.